This is going to be a short presentation on two of the most recurring themes in religion, philosophy, and modern storytelling. That is, the themes of awakening and enlightenment. As we've already seen, in several religions, the metaphors of awakening and enlightenment are invoked in order to express certain spiritual or mental experiences. According to Hinduism, Buddhism, and Sikhism, humans are thought to live in a world of illusion, Maya, that entraps them in a cycle of ignorance and suffering. One needs to pursue enlightenment through various religious disciplines in order to escape from this system. According to Christianity, the god of this world, that is, Satan, has blinded the minds of unbelievers to keep them from seeing the light of the gospel. Only by God's grace through faith can anyone realize the deception and become free. And then, according to Gnosticism, a religion that we haven't had the opportunity to study, the creator of the world, that is the demiurge, has duped human beings into worshiping him and accepting their own enslavement. Only by acquiring secret, that is, occult knowledge, can a person be liberated. Now, before reflecting further on these matters, you need to realize that terms like awakening and enlightenment are metaphors. People aren't being literally awakened from their sleep. They're not experiencing light shining literally into their faces. But it's as if they had been asleep or had been groping about in the dark with some false sense about what's real, what's true, and what's good. And then it's as if the person woke from that sleep or stepped out of a dark room into a bright place. One of the earliest uses of this enlightenment metaphor can be found in Plato's famous allegory of the cave. And here I'll play just a short video that summarizes that allegory.
Imagine prisoners that have spent their entire lives chained deep inside a cave. They have been chained so that they cannot see behind themselves, and they are forced to stare endlessly at the cave wall in front of them. Behind them, a fire is burning, and between the prisoners and the fire is a raised walkway. Now imagine that each day, a menagerie of objects crosses the walkway. Animals, and people carrying their wares to market. Their shapes create an intricate shadow play on the wall in front of the prisoners. This is the only world that the prisoners have ever known. The shadows and the echoes of unseen objects. Now, imagine that a prisoner is released. After some time adjusting to the blinding light, the freed prisoner will begin to experience the world outside of the cave for the very first time. And it is like nothing he could have ever imagined. With his new perception of the world, the man will of course want to return to his friends to share his incredible discoveries. But the prisoners cannot recognize their old friend. He appears as all things do. His voice is a distorted echo, and his body is a grotesque shadow. They cannot understand his fantastic stories of the world outside of the cave. To them, it will never exist. This, of course, does not make the world outside of the cave any less real.
In Plato's allegory, the shadows represent distorted images of reality. Those who grow up in the cave are imprisoned and don't even realize how their bondage has shaped the way that they understand the world around them. They mistake the shadows for realities and never consider that there could be anything more beautiful or more real than the shadows. One day a prisoner is released from the cave and is astonished to find that his former views had all been completely wrong. A far more beautiful reality existed outside of the cave. In his excitement, he rushes back into the cave to reveal this glorious truth to his friends, only to be dismissed or threatened. The prisoners, like his former self, have adjusted to their world and would rather live in a cave where they can go on contemplating ephemeral shadows than accept that they had been duped into embracing a false reality. So that's an early example of how the theme of enlightenment has been used, and we've seen also how it's been used in some of the religions of Hinduism, Buddhism, and so on. But the theme has also been used in some modern storytelling, in plays and novels and movies. In The Wizard of Oz, Dorothy and her friends experience their moment of awakening or enlightenment when they discover that the larger-than-life wizard is really just a frail old man who hides behind a curtain, pulling levers and playing tricks on the inhabitants of Oz.
Please, sir, we've done what you told us. We brought you the broomstick of the Wicked Witch of the West. We melted her.
Oh, you liquidated her, eh? Very resourceful.
Yes, sir. So we'd like you to keep your promise to us, if you please, sir.
Not so fast. Not so fast. I'll have to give the matter a little thought. Go away and come back tomorrow.
Tomorrow? Oh, but I want to go home now.
You've had plenty of time already.
Yeah. Do not arouse the wrath of the great and powerful Oz. I said come back tomorrow.
If you were really great and powerful, you'd keep your promises.
Do you presume to criticize the great Oz? You ungrateful creatures think yourselves lucky that I'm giving you audience tomorrow instead of 20 years from now.
Oh,
The great Oz has spoken.
oh,
Pay no attention to that man behind the curtain. The great Oz has spoken.
Who are you?
oh I am the great and powerful Wizard of Oz.
You are? I
yes.
don't believe you.
No, I'm afraid it's true. There's no other wizard except me. You humbug! Yes, it's exactly so. I'm a humbug.
Oh, you're a very bad man.
Oh, no, my dear. I'm a very good man. I'm just a very bad wizard.
Well, many other films and novels have pursued similar themes of enlightenment or awakening, including The Truman Show, Shutter Island, Wicker Man, The Giver, Dark City, and They Live. And you guys can probably think of some other ones, and if you know of some, let me know. I'm not like a huge movie buff, so I don't know that many films. But probably the most famous one that I should mention is The Matrix. In this film, the lead character, Neo, experiences his awakening or enlightenment after discovering that he's been living in a computer simulation. Everything he once thought was real was actually a lie, a false version of reality that had been created in order to exploit him and the rest of humanity.
Welcome, Neo. As you no doubt have guessed, I am Morpheus.
It's an honor to meet you.
No, the honor is mine. Please, come, sit. I imagine that right now you're feeling a bit like Alice. Tumbling down the rabbit hole?
You could say that.
I can see it in your eyes. You have the look of a man who accepts what he sees because he is expecting to wake up. Ironically, this is not far from the truth. Do you believe in fate, Neo?
No,
Why not?
because I don't like the idea that I'm not in control of my life.
I know exactly what you mean. Let me tell you why you're here. You're here because you know something. What you know you can't explain, but you feel it. You felt it your entire life, that there's something wrong with the world. You don't know what it is, but it's there, like a splinter in your mind, driving you mad. It is this feeling that has brought you to me. Do you know what I'm talking about?
The Matrix.
Do you want to know what it is? The Matrix is everywhere. It is all around us. Even now, in this very room. You can see it when you look out your window or when you turn on your television. You can feel it when you go to work, when you go to church, when you pay your taxes. It is the world that has been pulled over your eyes to blind you from the truth.
What truth?
That you are a slave, Neo. Like everyone else, you were born into bondage, born into a prison that you cannot smell or taste or touch. A prison for your mind. Unfortunately, no one can be told what the Matrix is. You have to see it for yourself. This is your last chance. After this, there is no turning back. You take the blue pill, the story ends. You wake up in your bed and believe whatever you want to believe. You take the red pill, you stay in Wonderland, and I show you how deep the rabbit hole goes. Remember, all I'm offering is the truth, nothing more. Follow me.
The Matrix is a system, Neo. That system is our enemy. But when you're inside, you look around, what do you see? Businessmen, teachers, lawyers, carpenters, the very minds of the people we are trying to save. But until we do, these people are still a part of that system, and that makes them our enemy. You have to understand, most of these people are not ready to be unplugged. And many of them are so inert, so hopelessly dependent on the system, that they will fight to protect it. Were you listening to me, Neo? Or were you looking at the woman in the red dress?
I was...
Look again. Freeze it.
This isn't the Matrix.
No. It's another training program designed to teach you one thing. If you are not one of us, you are one of them.
What are they?
Sentient programs. They can move in and out of any software still hardwired to their system. That means that anyone we haven't unplugged is potentially an agent. Inside the Matrix, they are everyone, and they are no one.
We have survived by hiding from them, by running from them. But they are the gatekeepers. They are guarding all the doors, they are holding all the keys, which means that sooner or later, someone is going to have to fight them.
Someone.
I won't lie to you, Neo. Every single man or woman who has stood their ground, everyone who has fought an agent has died. But where they have failed, you will succeed.
Why?
I've seen an agent punch through a concrete wall. Men have emptied entire clips at them and hit nothing but air. Yet their strength and their speed are still based in a world that is built on rules. Because of that, they will never be as strong or as fast as you can be.
What are you trying to tell me? That I can dodge bullets?
No, Neo. I'm trying to tell you that when you're ready, you won't have to.
Now, one of the ideas that keeps cropping up in various religions and in these films and novels is that the truth is not something that someone can just tell you. It's something that you have to pursue and embrace and experience for yourself. And so, for example, in Hinduism and Buddhism, certain guidelines are given for how one might go about pursuing enlightenment. But the rules are generally vague, and so the person is left, more or less, on his or her own. This is because the truth that brings enlightenment is thought to be unteachable. It cannot be absorbed passively, but it must be willingly and passionately sought after and discovered by the individual. In Plato's allegory, for example, the awakened or enlightened man wants desperately to share what he has discovered with his former prisoners. But to his chagrin, he cannot get through to them because the prisoners are stuck in their old way of thinking. And similarly, in The Matrix, Morpheus tells Neo, most of the people are not ready to be unplugged, and many of them are so inert, so hopelessly dependent on the system, that they will fight to protect it. In effect, the slaves have become the defenders of their own slavery. Now, to get to a point where enlightenment even seems like a worthy pursuit, a person will need, first of all, some curiosity. Second, he or she will need a willingness to think outside the box. But perhaps even more than these things, the person will need courage and stamina to ignore the peer pressure and fear and endure the other challenges that come with pursuing this path. In Buddhism and Jainism, and in The Wizard of Oz, these virtues can all be found within the person. In other traditions, such as Christianity and often in Hinduism, they generally come from outside, from a deity or transcendent being. And in The Matrix, Neo acts out a fated role. Enlightenment is usually preceded by a sense of disillusionment with the established order or the accepted wisdom. For example, many Hindus in the mid-2nd millennium BC came to see their religious overseers, the Brahmins, as having abused their office by taking advantage of people's trust and by using their authority not to help or free people, but to ingratiate themselves and keep people in a state of ignorance and subservience. Siddhartha Gautama, before he became the Buddha, learned that everyone around him had been lying to him. The world that he had been shown was just an elaborate hoax that he had been tricked into believing so that he would never choose to pursue enlightenment. In The Wizard of Oz, Dorothy would have never figured out how to return to Kansas if she hadn't first discovered that the wizard was a fraud. In Plato's allegory, and in The Matrix, the protagonists first have to confront the fact that their perceptions about reality were wrong. Notice that, in all the above examples, the first conscious move that a person makes toward enlightenment is the act of recognizing the lies for what they are. This is a highly subversive act, not just because it calls into question the established order, but because it calls into question what the person himself or herself has been taught to believe. In a sense, the person is revolting against his or her very self. Now here's an interesting quote from Oswald Chambers. He says, "Disillusionment means having no more misconceptions, false impressions, and false judgments in life. It means being free from these deceptions. Refusing to be disillusioned is the cause of much of the suffering of human life." So it may seem a bit ironic, but if you always choose to be trusting, credulous, and unsuspecting, then you're going to cause yourself and others around you a lot more suffering and grief. On the other hand, if you allow yourself to doubt or even become disillusioned, that is, disabused of your former illusions, then this, in the end, will help you to alleviate or escape a large amount of suffering. And that's because it helps you to see through the deceptions, and deceptions are often harmful. Okay, in all the religious traditions that I've mentioned above, Hinduism, Buddhism, Sikhism, Christianity, Gnosticism, as well as in Plato's allegory of the cave, and in the popular films that I've mentioned, the problem isn't just that humans have been tricked into believing a few lies here and there. Rather, their entire system or world has, as it were, been built on lies. So as long as the person is operating within that system or world, accepting its basic premises and playing by its rules, he or she will remain hopelessly trapped inside of it, unable even to see what's going on. Okay, let me say something now about why enlightenment or awakening is perceived to be such a struggle. Whether we're talking about religion, ancient philosophy, or modern films, enlightenment is always envisaged as a difficult pursuit. And the difficulty has been attributed to a number of things. First, as we've already seen, those who wish to pursue enlightenment will often have to learn how to think outside of the box. And this is difficult because people generally have a failure of imagination. They can't conceive of alternative ways of explaining their world or their experiences outside of what they've been told. And because of this, they're often led to think that they have to choose between 2 or 3 ways of looking at something, when, in fact, there may be many other ways that they haven't even considered. Ways that their leaders, the people in authority over them, would prefer that they not consider.
Despite what you might be thinking, these 2 circles are not equal. I repeat, these 2 circles are not equal. One is in fact larger than the other. What I need you to do is determine which one that is. So, please raise your hand if you believe the blue circle is larger than the red. All right. Please raise your hand if you believe the red circle is larger than the blue. All right, very good. Now, before I said anything about these 2 circles, what was your first instinct? Equal, right? Because they look equal. And the reason why they look equal is because, in fact, they are equal. These 2 circles are identical. Yet I got just about every one of you to raise your hand and say that they're not. So what did we learn? That you can be manipulated like that to believe in something that goes against your natural instincts. Just imagine as a child you're taught that the blue circle is larger than the red. If you say it enough times, you convince yourself that's the truth. If you're told the lie enough times, it becomes part of your reality.
Second, a person needs to feel that enlightenment is something that's worthy of investigation in the first place. Since most people are quite busy with their jobs, their families, or just more interested in various forms of amusement, they often lack the time or the energy to pursue enlightenment. Third, a person will have to accept that he or she has been fooled by the system, and this takes humility, which is a rare virtue in human beings. As Mark Twain once said, or supposedly said, apparently there's some debate about whether he said it in precisely this way, but as Mark Twain is alleged to have said, it's easier to fool people than to convince them that they have been fooled. Fourth, enlightenment is difficult because human beings are naturally inclined to trust and follow the guidance of their institutions and their leaders. They feel that it's not really their place to question what they've been told to believe or do. One must not question the experts. That's a message that is often insinuated, if not explicitly stated. Well, people grow up hearing that over and over, and so they develop a natural aversion toward questioning anything that the so-called experts tell them. Now, it's often supposed that people in the past naively followed their leaders, and as a consequence, did lots of things that were really silly, harmful, and downright self-destructive. All of those silly Hindus, Christians, Muslims, and so on, they just blindly trusted their priests, their bishops, their imams, because they didn't know how to think for themselves. And because of this, they were kept in the dark and exploited. Poor souls. I realize that few people would state it in quite that way, but I guarantee that many people think it. And the assumption is that we've somehow arrived at a more enlightened way of living. In fact, one of the most defining features of the so-called enlightenment was its movement away from religion and towards secularism. And so we now live in probably the most secular age that there's ever been. Do you think that people are more or less trusting of their so-called experts than they used to be? People will often claim to follow science rather than religion. But one often wonders whether science, at least as many people understand science, isn't just some kind of new belief system that functions largely in the same way as religion. People will often deny this quite vehemently. They say that science is vastly different from religion because it doesn't require blind faith. Science is not dogma, they tell us. On the other hand, many of these same people seem blissfully ignorant of alternative views, or they'll show little or no regard for others who are trying to present new scientific evidence or offer ideas that challenge the currently accepted ones, even if those currently accepted ones are manifestly wrong. I remember this Forbes article when it came out. You must not do your own research when it comes to science. Well, in every age and culture, people have been told to trust their leaders and authorities. One would think that people would eventually catch on to this and stop falling for it, but they never do. And I suspect that in this way, our age and culture are really no different than those of previous generations, religious or otherwise. As Voltaire once said, it is difficult to free fools from the chains that they revere. Now, he was talking about God and the church and stuff like that, but even in a secular society, I think that quote has tremendous application, because there are still people and institutions that we strongly revere, and it's very hard for us to question those things. Okay, fifth, political and cultural leaders are often keenly aware of this trusting aspect of human nature, and they exploit it in order to manipulate and control the masses. People sometimes recognize this to some extent. They'll often accept that their leaders sometimes lie. Of course, politicians lie, and they may even admit that their leaders lie frequently. But they still find it rather impossible to believe that their leaders could tell and promote a gargantuan lie. But listen to this quote from Adolf Hitler. He says, "In a gargantuan lie, there is always a certain force of credibility, because the broad masses of a nation would never think to fabricate colossal untruths, and they would not believe that others could have the impudence to distort the truth so outrageously." Do you see what he was saying there? He was saying that people may find it easy to believe that anyone would tell a small lie, maybe even a pretty big lie, but they find it impossible to believe that anyone would have the audacity, the arrogance, the gall to fabricate a monumental kind of lie. I mean, you and I would never dream of trying to get away with something like that, right? And so when we hear some monumental lie, we don't think to challenge or question it. We just accept it as true because we find it too hard to believe that anyone else would dare to try getting away with a massive, colossal, monumental lie. Sixth, people are easily swayed from pursuing enlightenment because they're afraid of what they'll discover. If the world isn't really what we've been told, then the implications could be terrifying. It could mean that we don't know who we can trust anymore. It could mean that there are powers at work in the world, perhaps even powers that we can't identify, who are driving us to do things that are not in our best interest. Many people find it too frightening or too disturbing even to consider these kinds of possibilities. But here's something for you to think about. Now, I decided to choose this illustration because I know it's going to be uncomfortable for many of you to consider. But I want to challenge you to think critically about everything. The moon landings are kind of a sacred cow for a lot of Americans. We think, we're so awesome, we were the first nation and the only nation to have ever sent people to the moon. Of course, we haven't gone back in like 50 years, but that's because we accidentally destroyed the technology, you see, and it's a painful process to build it back.
I'd go to the moon in a nanosecond.
The problem is we don't have the technology to do that anymore. We used to, but we destroyed that technology, and it's a painful process to build it back again.
You may or may not find that a credible explanation for why we haven't gone back to the moon. I'm not trying to tell you here what to believe about this topic. All I'm trying to encourage is a bit of critical thinking. Someone once said that if something that you believe is being questioned, and your first impulse is to react in anger or to shut down the discussion, that probably means that this is a topic that you need to think about more critically. Okay, so I'd like to read an excerpt from a book called Wagging the Moon Doggy. Now, the author believes that the moon landings were a hoax. I'm not necessarily agreeing with him about that, but I love the way that he frames the issues. I think he really puts his finger on why so many people are just unwilling to reconsider what they've been told about this topic. People cling so tenaciously, often even angrily, to what is essentially the adult version of Santa Claus. What primarily motivates them is fear. But it's not the lie that scares them. It's what the lie says about the world around us and how it really functions. For if NASA was able to pull off such an outrageous hoax before the entire world, and then keep that lie in place for 4 decades, what does that say about the control of information we receive? What does it say about the media, the scientific community, the educational community, and the other institutions we depend on to tell us the truth? What does it say about the very nature of the world we live in? That is what scares the hell out of people and prevents them from even considering the possibility that they could have been so thoroughly duped. It's not being lied to about the moon landings that people have a problem with. It is the realization that comes with that revelation. If they could lie about that, they could lie about anything. Here's something else to ponder. Did the Brahmin priests of India, the trusted leaders of that part of the world, knowingly lie when they told large swaths of people that they belonged to the lower castes because of the sins that they had committed in previous lives? If so, well, this was a real whopper of a lie, one that restructured society profoundly and caused tremendous hardships for untold millions. And yet the people accepted it, probably in large measure, because they found it unimaginable, first of all, that their trusted leaders would deceive them like this, and then secondly, that everyone around them could have been so terribly deceived. On that second point, people trust in consensus views, or they at least feel tremendous pressure to accept consensus views. And that makes sense, right? It's much easier to move with the herd than against it. To question the system can have serious consequences: loss of friends, reputation, social status, financial well-being, and perhaps even the loss of one's own life. People naturally fear these things and avoid them. The system therefore becomes self-reinforcing, often by the very people who are most disadvantaged by it. Take a look at this video. I think it tells a lot about our human nature. There's a hidden camera in the waiting room of this eye clinic because a sociological study is being conducted. The woman in the violet shirt doesn't know about any of this, but everyone else in the waiting room is in on the gag. They've been told to stand up every time they hear a beep from the intercom. The woman looks confused at first when she sees them doing this, but by the third beep she begins to stand with the others, and will continue to do so. Clearly, she is acting here out of peer pressure. But notice what happens next. One by one, the people in the waiting room are called in. Eventually, the woman in violet is the only one left. But even without the others present, she continues to stand whenever she hears the beep. Even more interesting, over the next few minutes, a new patient walks in. Like the woman in violet, he doesn't know that he's part of a sociological study. When he asks why she keeps standing, the woman tells him that everyone else had been doing it. So he starts doing it too. And as others enter the waiting room, they likewise conform to the behavior of these other two. And on it goes as others trickle in. What began as a pointless rule has now become a social norm. So, here's something you can ask yourself. How would I have behaved if I had lived in Nazi Germany or in the Stalinist Soviet Union? You may assume that you would have been part of the resistance, but it's always easier to evaluate matters in retrospect, and from a position of security. It's much harder to evaluate matters in the present as things are unfolding, and in an environment that is hostile to divergent opinions and actions. The quest for enlightenment engages and questions the person at every level of his or her philosophical commitments. It engages the person at the level of metaphysics because it's concerned with the nature of reality itself. At the level of epistemology, because it's concerned with what exactly we're able to know about the world and ourselves, and how we're able to know it. At the level of ethics, because a person's only going to feel prompted to seek out enlightenment if he or she regards truth as an important value. You hear all the time, I don't really care if the world is one thing or another. I don't really care if I'm being lied to about this or that. Reflecting on these deep philosophical questions is not going to make me happy. It's not going to help me succeed with my business. It's not going to help my marriage or my family. So why bother? Well, you see, a person who responds like this has already made many ethical judgments. Truth is not a significant value. What matters is being happy and successful in the present life. Okay, well, let me leave you with some final questions to ponder. What exactly is the world that you're experiencing right now? What is its nature? What are its characteristic properties? What about you and I? What are we? Do we have a soul? Do we have a free will? An independent mind? Do we have some kind of ongoing personal identity? Do we have any special dignity above the animals? What's real and what's not? How do you know that what you count as real or unreal is actually that? Why do you believe the things that you do? How do you know that what you believe is in fact true? That your moral outrage about one kind of behavior and your moral approval of another is not misguided and wrong? Have you considered alternative ideas? Or do you just accept the established wisdom? Or limit yourself to the 2 or 3 socially acceptable options on any given debate? Are you motivated on these matters by a genuine love for truth, or by other considerations like self-preservation, utility, and ego? Well, if you're seriously considering these kinds of questions, you may be on a personal quest for enlightenment.
The only limit to a human future is in our own imaginations.